Thank you. So I'm Sara Brumfield with FromThePage, and I'm here today with Ben, my partner. And you may have heard of FromThePage for crowdsourced transcription projects, but over the last couple of years, we've expanded to support a lot of different types of materials and tasks. Sort of a caveat up front, we realize that transcripts are a type of metadata, but we're going to be talking about metadata and transcripts as if they are two totally different things. We know they're not. Agenda, next slide. So we're going to be talking a little bit about FromThePage, and then we're going to talk about how we came to create this metadata creation feature in FromThePage, and kind of what our design considerations were and the trade-offs we had to make. Ben's going to do a demo of setting up a metadata creation project and then actually doing some metadata creation. And then we'll kind of bring it back and have a discussion and some Q&A. We'll send out an email after this, probably about 24 hours after this. It'll have a recording, a link to the recording, and any resources we mentioned.
Okay. So I'm going back and forth between the waiting room and this, so I apologize if I sound a little distracted. So Sara and I run a platform for crowdsourced manuscript transcription and OCR correction called FromThePage. There are a number of different kinds of crowdsourcing tasks out there. We focus on special collections and archives, and specifically textual records. We started off doing work with transcriptions, but I think you'll see that there's some interesting ways that we can move from transcriptions into other kinds of crowdsourcing tasks. So our platform, we try to keep it as simple as possible. So we let people see an image of a page and give them a place to transcribe the text from the page. We want to make things as we want to make the technology as simple as we can, because the tasks that we ask people to do, reading old text, figuring out how to encode it as something that's typewritten, that's hard enough. That's really, really challenging for anyone who's worked on it will agree, I believe, that it's important and difficult work. Originally, we developed the software to support texts like this. So this is something that could be transcribed as plain text, or plain text with a little bit of markup, to support people who are reading this or people who are performing a full text search. So in 2018, thanks to funding from the Council of State Archivists, we were able to support transcription of structured data like this. So this is producing a record about a single image, which may be part of a larger item, right? But the interesting thing about this is that this is structured data transcription, right? We're asking people to type the first name of the groom, the middle name of the groom, the last name of the groom, the same thing for the bride, and the dates.
But not all of the other text that's on this form, because you know what it is, and it's the same on all 100,000 of these.
Right. So last year, we also added support for ledgers and spreadsheets. So this is also structured, but this is structured data in which you may have multiple records on the same image. And this is the kind of thing that actually does require a kind of spreadsheet to transcribe, to match the spreadsheet that
you see on the screen.
Yeah, you see on the screen, right? The original ledger. So these new kinds of tasks are mainly driven by our collaborators at the institutions we work with, whether those are state archives or university libraries or other memory institutions, public libraries.
But when you build software with empathy, you listen to the people who use your software, but you also watch how they're already using your software. So when we saw Ohio University run a staff project creating metadata for their dance poster collection, we recognized it was not exactly the same style of project we were used to seeing. And because of that, we should pay attention. And then when we looked back, next slide, we also realized that our very first field-based project, the Alabama Department of Archives and History's World War I Service Cards project, which Betty, who's on the call, actually helped transcribe a lot of that. And they indexed fields for folks from Alabama serving in World War I. This could also be considered a metadata project. They created item level metadata for each card in the collection and then re-indexed the collection using that metadata. So what the dance posters and the index cards had in common, though, was that they were single images per form, one poster or one card to answer all the fields or questions. That meant that our field-based transcription was good enough for item level metadata. Okay, but what if you want to collect fields or answer questions about a 3-page letter or a 300-page book? Our model didn't work. And since Meredith at Alabama knew she had an upcoming project, the Civil War and Reconstruction Governors of Alabama, that she wanted to do just that, it was at the top of her list when Alabama pulled together a syndicate of state archives to fund some new features in FromThePage. So in 2021, COSA members, specifically Alabama, Florida, Indiana, Maryland, Missouri, North Carolina, Texas, and Virginia, and many of their friends organizations, which we love because it means these projects are not just being pushed from the institutions, but pulled by the volunteers who are seeking meaningful ways to contribute. They funded, tested, and provided a ton of feedback for 4 new features in FromThePage: spreadsheet transcription, reviewer role, metadata creation, and quality control. So this is the 3rd of those features. So metadata creation is different from our traditional transcription. Metadata applies to items, not to pages. Your transcribers need to be able to see more than one page at a time. Maybe you need to see the front matter of a book or the very last page of a letter, because that's what tells you who wrote it or when it was published. Metadata creation may be separate from transcription, but maybe not, which is an interesting sort of consideration. Metadata creation may be done by different people. Maybe you have volunteers doing first pass of metadata creation, where they're looking at senders and recipients and dates for letters. And then you have staff doing another pass where they're looking at when it was acquired and how it was digitized and what the rights are on it. And you may not actually need transcription to be able to do metadata, which, you know, for us, we're like, oh, wait, you don't have to put transcription at the center of the task, right? Because that's what we're used to doing. So let's go to the next page. So let's take a quick look. Ben's going to give a whole demonstration of this flow in a moment, but here's what it looks like to the person creating the metadata. So this looks a lot like a field-based transcription project, except there's a handful of differences. You'll see on the far left, you can see all 4 pages in this letter, and you can navigate between them without moving off of this page. So you can keep your form on the right. The form on the right was configured by the project owner, so in this particular case, but to collect certain fields that they wanted to collect. And then you can also change, we don't have a screenshot of this, but we'll show you in the demo what you see. You can see the original images, but if a transcript has been done, you can look at the transcript. And if you have, if you imported this from another system that has metadata, or if you uploaded a metadata spreadsheet, you can actually see the metadata associated with this item already. So that's kind of the transcriber side view, or the volunteer side view. And then let's go to the next slide, which is, here's how a project owner sets this up. They choose whether you can do text, whether to do transcription and metadata or just metadata, can add some additional instructions that show up above the field. And then you configure which lines and what fields you want. You can do text fields, you can do date fields, you can do select fields. So there's some options here. So there's a lot of ways to mix and match this feature with other features in FromThePage to get different kinds of projects. So all of these would create metadata, but kind of in different ways. So you can set things up to do transcription, and at the end of a document's transcription, prompt the volunteer to create metadata, to fill out one of these metadata forms. You can do just metadata, no transcription, just all I want for this item is metadata.
And that might be appropriate for things that don't have text on them, like photo collections or
pictures of sculptures in your museum, right? You can start getting really creative and think about what needs metadata that doesn't need transcription, right? You can do transcription as a project, and only after transcription is done for all of the documents, turn on metadata creation. So it's kind of a two-pass thing where transcriptions are already available. In fact, we've seen this in use by
Dartmouth.
yes, Dartmouth did a letter project where they had staff do transcription. I think it was student workers do transcription, and then they turned on metadata creation for a collection of letters that you could see the transcription, but you didn't have to do the transcription. That's kind of the opposite of this next one, crowd transcription, where you ask volunteers to do the transcription, but then you have staff create the metadata. So again, a two-phase thing, but in the middle of those two phases, you make the project private and just ask staff to work on it. You could do the same thing where you have the crowd transcribe and create some basic metadata, who sent it, who received it, what date, what it was created on, and then make the project private and have staff do enhanced metadata beyond that. If you want to revise existing metadata, that seems like a very staff project to me, but you can do that as a private project and just view the imported metadata and create new fields for the new metadata based on that. And you could also do things like translation of existing metadata. So you import your existing metadata and you view that and you create translated fields for it. So lots of possible workflows here. So let's take a minute and talk about the other half of the configuration of these projects, which is what do you bring into the system? So FromThePage requires images. Those images, though, can be zip files full of images. We can pull them out of PDFs. You can import them from systems like Content DM or any system that supports IIIF, and we'll reference those images. You can optionally pull in text to support your metadata creation, or you can also do text correction if you're doing OCR and your OCR is kind of messy. But you can pull in OCR files, the text layer from a PDF, or by creating transcriptions and FromThePage first. If you're doing a metadata revision or a metadata translation project, or just maybe a metadata enhancement project where you're adding more fields, you'll want to pull in your existing metadata. So that can be done via a spreadsheet, or it can come in via a IIIF manifest or from Content DM. So lots of different ways to get material in.
So how do you get the material back out again? So if you're running one of these projects, you need to present forms to volunteers or staff members, whoever's creating the metadata, but you need to pull it back out again in order to use it. So what we do is provide a way to export work metadata. And what that will produce is a spreadsheet that gives you the title and the URL and from the page, so that you can correlate each row in the spreadsheet back to the item that was imported in from the page. It will also include any metadata that you uploaded as columns in the spreadsheet. And then if you look at the bottom of this, you'll see an additional set of columns that we add to this, right, which gives you the status, whether the metadata whether descriptive metadata has been created or not, who did the metadata creation, and then the actual contents of what was created. So you see sender first name, sender last name, document date. Those are all fields that we were using, that we prompt the volunteer to actually do, right? So pulling these out means that you have a spreadsheet that has all of your existing metadata in some sets of columns, and then in the same row, all of the newly created metadata in a different set of columns. As people are doing metadata correction, we do the same kind of version tracking that we do in FromThePage for transcriptions. So you can see the different versions of this. You can see that in this particular most recent version, I added the recipient last name of Sorrel because I figured that one out.
I think you changed, yeah.
Yes, I also changed the first name from Pretty to Mitty, because Pretty turns out to be a Mitty Sorrel's nickname to the author of this particular letter. I think it's charming.
Right. The same review features that we have for transcription, we also have for metadata. So depending on how much bandwidth you have for staff review or volunteer review, you can ask people to mark metadata for needing review, because it's basically raising your hand and saying, I'd really like someone else to look at this. Or you can mark everything that comes through as needing review. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is a demo.
All right. So I am going to move all of your happy faces over here and jump into one of these projects. So this is a project that I just created, and it is a handful of letters that are imported from the Portal to Texas History that were actually created by the Star of Texas Museum, which is a very small historic site in rural Texas that's only about 25 years old. So it's new, it's small, they've digitized a lot of letters, they've described some of them. You can see you have some of these descriptions with senders and stuff. But if we dive into the letters themselves, the structured metadata just isn't there, right? So we don't know what date this letter was written, for example, this letter from Miss LaFontaine. And we don't even have creator, we can guess based on the imported metadata that it's written from someone LaFontaine to Mrs. Dahlgren, but that's not in the standardized sender, recipient, creator kinds of fields that
Make
you'd
it easy to
expect.
search,
Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to convert this into a metadata transcription and translation project. So if I am the person who owns this project, I can go in and say I want to enable metadata description. And now that prompts me to describe what kind of flow I want. So I can either ask users to just create metadata, or I can ask them to transcribe text and then create metadata. We're going to do that first one, that transcription and metadata combined first right now. So I can add description. So please okay, so since this is correspondence, I'm going to do the same thing we've done before and say sender first name. I'm going to say sender last name, and probably date.
Do you think recipient first?
No, we're going to do that on separate lines.
Okay.
And I'm going to say that I want this date to be a date type of field, which is a very specific thing that is going to prompt users to enter year, month, day format. So I'm going to save this. You'll see we've got this in the preview, and you can see the date has this year, month, day mask over it. Now we'll add a line for the recipient. And now we're going to add another line for subjects. And this is a special thing called a multi-select. And if we save that, we are going to configure options. So
yeah, so this is set up as a pop-up field so that you can, with a really long place to put things, because you might want to copy and paste a list that you have from elsewhere. You kind of want to keep it just to things that would actually apply to this collection, but we recognize that there's often a long list of subjects, so you can create them someplace else and then just paste them in here.
So I'm going to throw just a handful of the kinds of things that you'd expect from 19th century documents.
Music into.
Oh, music, great, yes.
Because I know there was a...
Okay, so I will save those. All right, so here are our options. So let's
scroll down for the preview and let's see what those options look like.
Yeah, so we can choose one or more of those. So I will say that I'm done configuring this. And let's actually try this out from the kind of perspective that a user would have, whether that user is a staff member or not. So I jump into this, and this looks just like our usual transcription screen, and we're going to transcribe a little bit of this. So
March 26th,
90.
This is Paul Dahlgren. Dear Madame. With your carriage return permission, I would like carriage return to add your carol, capital, Christmas memories in quotes, to a collection of choice hymns. Okay.
hymns and carols. On Christmas.
Yep. Under the title of Songs of Christmas. So solicit your carol.
Save this. Actually, we're done with it because we did the whole thing. And go to the next page. Your carol.
Something I am not something.
Something. Yeah, so this is unclear.
Anybody else read that one?
Trespassing.
Okay.
Too much on your kind of nature.
Receive a favorable reply. Yours much.
Respect. Okay, so this one, I'm going to say needs review, but we did transcribe almost all of it. Interesting thing, because the text breaks and doesn't make sense, I think that they actually missed some pages on this.
Oh, you think so?
Scanning, yeah.
Mm.
Okay, but we're done transcribing both pages of this letter, and now we are prompted to add metadata, right? So we can look at this and say, all right, the sender was, who is the sender? The sender was La Fontaine. La Fontaine. All right. The date was something 90, 1890, 1790,
No.
1990. We'll take a look.
1890.
We're going to come back to this here in a minute. Okay, the recipient was.
Oh gosh, Mrs. Paul. That's an interesting first name. Maybe we would do a better job of that. And the place of composition is New York.
Right. Subject's mentioned as music. Okay, and I'm going to save that. There's this open question, right? We know it's March 26th. We don't know what year. If we take a look at the instructions, it says, well, you can use the context of letters and any additional research you can find. Well, I actually just did a search for Paul Dahlgren and Christmas in Google, and I came up with this book, Songs for Christmas, by
down one, it was in the
R.A. Life.
right there.
Okay, Reverend William F. Morgan.
No, that's the honoree. Sorry.
Rachel R. LaFontaine, and we have a year. You're right, 1891. All right, so this is one of the things that people can do. And while I'm not a trained archivist, so I would not be able to figure out Library of Congress subject headings or all these other archival terms. I can definitely Google and figure out that this is Rachel LaFontaine, and this is 1890. March is 03 and 26.
Wait, let's save this, but let's also put a note.
Okay.
With a link to where you found that, because I would think.
Okay, so there we go. So the same kinds of discussions that people can do as they transcribe can also be done as they're creating metadata. So I'll save that note.
Did not like that note.
Didn't like
we'll
that.
worry
Okay.
about that later.
All right. So this is done. And but one of the things that I wanted to show as we're doing this kind of work is the kinds of other things that you can do with metadata description, the kinds of sources you can do with metadata description. Everything that we did just now came from viewing the image, right? So let's take a look at a different project, sorry, the same project, but a different document. So this is a document that I've transcribed partially already. And I just transcribed the very beginning and the very end of the document. You can see these are incomplete. Well, we're going to jump straight into creating metadata. And again, we want the same kinds of things, but in addition to doing this from the image and being able to go through the different images, I can also look at the transcribed text, right? So if someone has already figured out all the handwriting, then I have the chance of coming in and saying, aha, all right, well, I know I can just read what they've done and work from that. And I don't have to figure out the handwriting itself. This can be really nice if you have people creating the metadata who aren't that great at handwriting, and people creating the transcription who perhaps aren't that great at the kinds of archival terminology you might be using here.
Or I'm thinking, you know, your metadata could be done by high schoolers, but your transcription probably isn't because they're not very good at cursive handwriting.
The other thing we can do, because we imported this data from elsewhere, is we can drive this project filling out this form, not just off the images of the text, but we can look at the existing metadata, right? So we can see that someone has added metadata. They say this letter was created in 1800. You know, from what I know about the history of Texas, no one named Edwin Buck would be in this part of Texas in the year 1800. So this is certainly incorrect. So let's take a look at what this could be and add a better date. So we look at the text. We say February 14th, 1850. Let's double check that with the page image. And I can kind of see how somebody viewed this as 1800, but this is actually a 5. In fact, this might also be a 5. 1850 or 1855. Yeah. I'm going to go with 1855. Yeah, right. So 1855. 02, 02, 04, and we're going to save that. So that's talking about the sources. We've talked about flows a little bit when Sarah was describing how this works, and I'm just going to show that really quickly. So if we had a metadata only project, we could switch over to say all users do is create metadata, they don't transcribe text. So I'm going to save this now that I've configured it that way. So now if I go take a look at this, rather than being prompted to transcribe the documents, I'm prompted to just create the metadata. So this one needs better metadata, this one needs metadata. If I click in, I'm prompted to add metadata, and there's no opportunity to transcribe because this is not a transcription project, right? And I can actually move from one document to another rather than one page to another.
You're going to show where the export shows up?
Yeah, so getting the data out, right? I talked about the content of the data itself. To actually get at it, you go to the export tab and then you can click export the work metadata as CSV. And so that would have all that information that was added with a row for each one of the works that we worked
open
on.
in any spreadsheet system.
Right.
And it's great for programmers to pull into.
So back to our presentation.
Okay, next slide. Yeah, so this is sort of our hoped for outcomes with this project. We know from discussions with the archivist Ashley Yandel, sorry, at the North Carolina State Archives. She did her master's research on kind of what people search for and how archivists describe things and how they're not always the same thing. So you might be looking for vintage farm photos and
to decorate your restaurant with,
right? And what the sort of stuff you're looking for is actually labeled, you know, agriculture pigs, right? Because that's where you have your vintage pictures of pigs on a farm. So this idea that maybe you can start pulling in public terminology from volunteers is a neat idea that we think could work. We haven't seen anyone do it yet, but let's see, every archivist gathering I go to, whether it's a regional archives conference or SAA, there's always jokes about just how big the backlog is and how much material there is to be described. So we hope that this can help move that forward, that people can get through more of their backlog in kind of faster or different ways. We think it's a new model for public engagement. We've been doing crowdsourcing projects, transcription crowdsourcing for over a decade, but we haven't done a lot of this type of description tasks. So I think it'll be interesting to see what volunteers think of it, whether they enjoy doing this. I think some people will, and some people will prefer to do transcription, right?
I mean, it's a very different kind of task because you're doing this different sleuthing work. I can't tell you how delighted I was when I found the collection of hymns for Christmas and was able to figure out the actual date that referred to.
Right, or you fixed something, right? Fixing things is always very motivating. So the date on that letter. We also think this has a lot of potential for staff work. This is something that lets you work at home to describe material that maybe previously you were working physically in the archive. And we, our, how do I say this French word? Raison d'etre. I'm not very good at this. Is to encourage collaboration between the public and memory institutions. So we think this just makes that better and better. So we're really excited about the possibilities here. So this quote that our colleague Bethany found points out that users of metadata are very diverse. And what we hope is that this is a small step to help you meet them where they are. Because we're really looking forward to what you do with this. Would you use it to describe objects as well as documents? What about photographs? We actually have some photograph identification projects on FromThePage, but it's kludgy because it's not a perfect match for how we think of the world and the tasks. You could use this for folder level descriptions. So you have a folder with 50 random things in it. I think it would be interesting to ask volunteers to try to describe what's in the folder, or maybe it's just a way for staff members to get that folder described in a different way. Do you have volunteers who would be willing to translate metadata to make your collections more accessible to a broader audience? And I think this makes potentially your material more accessible, both from an accessibility point of view, but also just more findable and more usable by more people. So we're curious what you think of this, what we could do to make it better. It's interesting because when you start talking about this, we've already had a request that's been repeated 3 times from people who'd like to hook up those subject categories that you can add in metadata to. We have a way to index terms in transcriptions, and they'd really like that to be kind of a round trip thing that you can use both ways. So it's interesting that that's come up so many times. But yeah, we want to hear from you. We want your ideas for the types of projects you might be interested in doing and what you think.
Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing and encourage anybody who has questions or comments to unmute themselves or type into the chat. Actually, we've got a question in the chat already, which is question is, can metadata be outputted as either pipe delimited or tab delimited? Currently, we're using a CSV library to generate the metadata that, so far as we've seen, works well in systems like LibreOffice and Google Docs, both of which can do further exports using different delimiters.
In other words, open the comma separated values in a spreadsheet and save them as a tab separated value document. That's kind of your fastest way to get there. Right.
I should also mention, this is a pretty technical question. We are currently on our second draft of an API to provide access to structured data and structured metadata. If you'd like to weigh in on that, send email to support@fromthepage.com and we'll point you to the issue, and you can help design the best ways to get this data out programmatically. So I hope that helped, Gerard. Other questions or comments? People feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat or anything. If you raise your hand, we'll try to figure out how that works. We're not that great at Zoom reactions. Any other questions or comments?
Nobody loves us enough to ask anything.
Here we go. Exploding with possibilities with the objects collection. Great, Linda.
Lydia.
Lydia, sorry. We'd be very excited to see what you come up with, and we'd be happy to brainstorm. You know, I tend to think about, you know, flat things that I'm used to dealing with, like photographs, but even photographs, right? Lots of times there's important material written on the back of the photograph. And so being able to provide multiple images front and back and for objects side to side.
Yeah.
I think
You
that
know,
could be really neat.
well, and we're very involved in the IIIF community, and I know the museums group there has spent a lot of time thinking about how do you take your images of objects and kind of pull them together, so you have, you know, the front of the sculpture and then all of the sides and maybe the bottom too, right? Because there's useful information there that you might need. So
I'll just pop in. I don't have my video on. This is Lydia. So yeah, right now we're doing a inventory of our collection. It's an IMLS funded inventory that we're not just doing physical attributes, but we're also doing cultural attributes, so that we can determine what we don't have as much as what we do have. And so I'm seeing this as a great platform for, particularly for our students. We do a lot of transcribathons, and they struggle with the cursive, and so I can really see them jumping into something like this and talking about how they view things culturally in a lot of this material. So
yeah, I think
yeah,
that would be
fascinating.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Okay, well, we are always available via the email that sent out your reminders. So that's usually mine, Sarah at FromThePage.com. Oh, Gerard asked about the API. Ben's going to go pull up the link to that and put it in the chat for you.
Yeah.
We'd also, you know, remind you that there's a From the Page trial that's 200 pages long, that if you want to just poke around and kind of kick the tires and see how this works, you're welcome to do that. We're also happy to hop on calls and, you know, walk you through importing material and configuring projects. So we really appreciate all of your time. Ben's going to go pull this in before you. So yeah, any other questions? Anything else we can do? One second on that.
Yeah, I haven't pulled the. It's a little complicated to pull this one in. Okay, all right, Gerard, there are a couple of links there to the structured data API. And kind of where that work is right now. It ties into a lot of the rest of our API work, or it will once it's ready. There are no links to anything in progress just yet.
Are there ways to link Library of Congress authority IDs to names we transcribe? That's a really interesting question. And it almost reminds me of like the snack project.
Right.
But that's kind of going off on a
So we designed this to be extensible to connect to authority files or authority providers. We have not actually extended it to do that yet. So it's definitely something we're interested in exploring. The current functionality that we demoed right now requires any kind of IDs and those subjects and things to actually be uploaded or cut and pasted, as you saw. We'd be very happy to chat about trying to build something.
How it could work.
Right.
And, yeah.
I mean, one of the challenges that we have is that, you know, which authority do we look at? Do we look at Library of Congress? Do we look at SNAC or VIAF? Do we look at Wikidata? Do we look at GBEF? There's so many of them that we really kind of wanted to wait until someone was ready to use it and had an authority that they wanted to connect to.
Because software is much easier to build with a real, very, very specific use case in mind and people who are willing to test it.
Betty asks about the process being used for personal files rather than something from institutions. Yes, I mean, I originally started developing the software for my own family diaries. And so we offer very small plans, an individual researcher plan that lets people upload documents to a single project and then use any of the transcription or metadata creation features that we have for, there's a smaller page limit, there's a single project limit, but it seems to work for
Yeah,
those
we've
people
got,
using it.
we have a project that's run by an individual, which is a bunch of World War II letters that happened to be in the Delaware Historical Society, but it was her husband's letters when he was deployed as a pilot.
Yeah, flying bomber missions over Europe from the UK. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, she's really pushed what you can do with a single project. So.
All right. Any other questions? And again, feel free to send us email if you have suggestions for the API or ideas for using the feature, or just want to brainstorm.
We really appreciate your time, and we're going to let you go 15 minutes early.
That's right.
So thank you all.
Thanks.